And let's bring in Peter Andersen now, Chief Investment Officer, Andersen Capital Management. It's good to have you on, Peter. Let's talk investors, of course, continuing to rotate out of mega cap tech names and into the smaller, more cyclical names that seem to benefit more from those lower borrowing costs. But is there, still more room to fall for those tech names?
It all really depends on the coming weeks. I'm not quite in agreement that that this movement deserves to be called a total rotation. We've seen this for a short duration only. It could be a number of things. I think investors would be quite alarmed if it were a true rotation, because that would mean a vast exodus of the large cap stocks and into the small cap stocks. On the other hand, it could just be that investors are starting to look at the small caps that have been largely ignored for the past year or so. So I'm not quite in agreement with the general market consensus that this is a rotation. I think it's merely a couple of days of volatility based on the uncertainty of the election and, of course, the past assassination attempt. And those worries sometimes have different ways of manifesting themselves. So I think it's a complicated answer as to what's going on. And I think a little bit of everything has contributed to it this week.
Right. Peter, but for the longest time now, markets have been driven by those mega cap names, with investors dumping them now. Is there weakness ahead for equity markets, or you have the view that, we shouldn't see too much of a correction? And what do you think, or how do you think earnings season will play into the way markets move?
I still own NVIDIA. I've owned it since 2015, and so I'm not included in the selling category this week, or frankly, the past 6 months. So I don't think that it's a realization that NVIDIA is overvalued, or that its business model, somebody has discovered a flaw in the business model. There is really no material news that have come out about NVIDIA specifically. So I would put that on hold for a bit until we see some material news one way or the other. But as it stands now, I'm holding. And with regards to just the large cap names, the handful of names that have led the recovery, of course I worry about that. And we would also like to see the rest of the S&P 500 move up. I do think the earnings season will give us that opportunity, because the economy still is in very, very good shape. And there are many stocks in the S&P 500 that have lagged, and this would be a good opportunity to see them catching up.
Right. And you've also updated on your AI positions. I think you say that you still think there is hope for AI, but you've identified some sell triggers. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. Normally, I have sell triggers for stocks that are very measurable, that are directly related to the metrics of the company, the performance, the financial performance of the company, revenues, margins, net income. But with AI, we're not quite there yet. So what I'm worried about are two things. One, and they're very general terminology. So one is what I would call the better mousetrap theory. In other words, if somebody comes along and some new technology comes along to displace what everybody is chasing with the NVIDIA GPU, the graphics cards, that would be concerning. I don't see that in the cards. However, the other sell trigger is what I call the great disillusionment, meaning that if we are waiting for this vast build out, as we are, and we do not see any manifestations to the betterment of companies' operations pretty soon, I think investors will lose their patience and start dumping the stocks, because they will say, AI has promised us the world, and yet we have not seen any manifestations of that. So let me just end with this last on the sell trigger comment. For instance, if a company comes out in its earnings and says, we have abandoned our AI efforts because we have discovered that it's not going to increase our profitability, that would be a major material piece of news that could spread like wildfire through the markets. I don't anticipate that happening, but that's what I'm diligently looking for.
Oh, that's definitely very interesting considerations. Peter Andersen, the Chief Investment Officer at Andersen Capital Management.